Well, since you guys liked my last video so much, I thought I'd do another one. Today, we're going to take a look at 8 more tricks you can do just about anywhere. But first, let me quickly update you on one thing from the last video. In the last video, I demonstrated this trick. And at the time, I didn't know what this trick was called. Well, one of you fine viewers mentioned that this was called a track sit. And someone else mentioned that this could be done with one foot on the pedal and one foot on the wheel. The track sit differs from the track stand because, as the name implies, you're seated when doing the track sit and standing when doing the track stand. Alright, now let's get into the new batch of tricks. This first trick is the one-handed wheelie. If you have been subscribed to this channel for some time, you will know that wheelies aren't something I'm really good at. However, I have found that one-handed wheelies are good practice for wheelies. One-handed wheelies force you to focus on a smooth and consistent pedal stroke versus simply leaning back or pulling up on your bars. I can one-handed wheelie just about as long as I can wheelie normally, which for the record isn't very long, but that just goes to show you don't need to be a wheelie master to be able to one-handed wheelie. Just be sure to straighten your bars when your front end drops. This next trick is the no-handed lander. It is easiest to learn the no-handed lander while doing a small bunny hop. This will help you get comfortable with the idea of taking your hands off the bars when you're about to land, because that is not exactly intuitive. The big idea with the no-handed lander is you want to absorb the whole impact with your legs alone, so your body weight must be centered over the bottom bracket when you land. Another trick is to pinch your seat with your knees. This helps bounce the bike side to side. A variation of this is a one-handed lander, which I actually find a little bit more difficult since the one hand seems to pull the bike off balance. If you go for the one-handed lander, be sure you keep your feet heavy and your hands light. Most riders are pretty familiar with the back wheel skid. In fact, it's one of the first tricks most riders usually learn how to do. But not as many people are familiar with the front wheel skid. To learn the front wheel skid, it's easiest to do this on a surface that has less traction, such as a gravel parking lot or a section of grass. Approach the skid with a decent amount of speed and be sure you get all your weight behind your back wheel. Only start applying the brakes once your weight is all the way behind your seat. I find myself pulling back on the bars slightly to help get the front wheel lighter and brake traction. If you find yourself getting off balance, just let off the front brake and you should be able to correct it. Keep in mind you can only front wheel skid for a short period of time. This is called a 360 tire tap. The idea is to spin a full 360 revolution by jumping in the air and then finishing the revolution on your back wheel. If you're looking to learn how to do a 360, this is a good stepping stone. Just be wary that a 360 tire tap may become a bad habit that's hard to break. This trick is much easier to learn on a bike with a short wheelbase, such as a BMX bike or a dirt jumper. Before learning a 360 tire tap, you at least want to be able to spin a 180. When you 360 tire tap, you want to try to over-rotate a 180 and land with your back wheel heavy in a manual position. By keeping your weight back in a manual position, you should be able to complete the full revolution. If you are finding it hard to spin a full 360-degree revolution, try a 270-degree revolution, and then gradually spin more and more until you get to the whole 360. This next trick is most commonly called a crank flip, but sometimes people refer to it as a kick flip. It's when you flick your cranks backwards so that they do a full revolution, and then before you land, catch them with your feet and land smoothly. To do this, you're going to want to make sure that you're in the middle gear in the back so that your chain line is straight. You will also want to make sure that your cranks spin freely when spun backwards. I happened to bend my derailleur on my last ride, so that made spinning my cranks backwards a little bit more difficult. Despite how this looks, your front foot does most of the heavy lifting in a crank flip. With your front pedal slightly above level, point your toe and flick backwards. That should initiate the spin. While your cranks are spinning, reposition your feet to your normal riding position to catch the pedals. I personally find this more comfortable to do on a full suspension bike because if you miss your pedals, well, it's a little bit more comfortable. This trick is called an abubica. It's when a rider stalls on their back wheel and then re-enters backwards. For this trick, you'll need to have a back brake and be pretty comfortable rolling backwards. Abubicas can be done just about anywhere, but it's easiest to learn on an elevated ledge or a bank. When you get to the top, hop up and put all your weight on your back wheel while squeezing a handful of brake. When you first learn this, you'll need to lean back a little bit further than you initially think. When you are stalled, preload with your legs and then spring up and backwards. Aim to land with both wheels at the same time, roll backwards for a little bit and then revert out. This next trick is called a foot plant, though it's often referred to as a fast plant depending on who you talk to. It's like a 180 air except you plant your foot on the ground. You can do these on flat ground, but I find it's easier to do if you have a bank. The steeper, the better. You can use the bank to help propel you into the air, and then once you're in the air, you can take your foot off and plant it on the ground. Almost immediately after planting your foot on the ground, you want to spring back up and get your foot back on the pedal before you land. The biggest mistake with a foot plant is people plant their foot before they jump. You want to be jumping into the foot plant. You can learn these on almost any bike, but doing this on a more nimble and smaller bike will be a lot easier. You might recognize these next two tricks from Danny McCaskill's video, A Wee Day Out. This is a 180 skid to revert. It's one of those tricks that looks a lot easier than it actually is, but once you get it, you feel like a boss. You can do this almost anywhere, but I found a gravel parking lot to be almost ideal. The hardest part about this trick is transitioning from the skid to the revert. When you're skidding, you're going to want to keep your weight over your front wheel to help keep your back wheel light and skid around. But as you get close to the 180 mark, shift your weight back over your back wheel to stop the rotation. The momentum from the skid will help carry you backwards, and from there, all you need to do is revert out. To make this trick look cooler, drag your front wheel on the ground as you revert. This is called a tire slide. It's kind of like a glorified skid. It happens when you get both wheels on opposite sides of a long and skinny object. I found that parking lot bumpers to be the ideal location to do tire slides. Approach the object at close to a parallel angle, and then pick your back end up and over to the other side. When your back wheel is in the air, grab a fistful of back brake to help break traction. As your back wheel touches down on the other side, be ready for it to slide out and counter steer with your front wheel. To get out of the slide, you're either going to want to steer away or pick your back end back up and over. As you practice this, be ready to bail a few times because it takes a while to get the hang of it. If you find this to be too difficult, there's a variation that you can do on curbs where you get your front wheel on top and let your back wheel drag. Most likely, you've already done this by accident when you try to jump up a curb. Alright, I know I said 8, but I like to over-deliver, so here's 2 bonus ones. If you ride mountain bike trails a lot, this next trick will be rather useful. This is a front wheel flick. You can use it to flick trail debris to the side without getting off your bike. It's a combination movement between lifting your front wheel and turning your bars quickly. The idea is that you want to strike the object on the backside of your front wheel and flick it out of the way. If you get good enough at this and have a few friends, you can play a game called Cycle Ball. You can also do something similar with your back wheel. It's kind of like a skid, but you lift your back wheel. I find flicks to be useful to remove branches from the trail that have fallen during storms. This last trick is called a no-footed manual, though I have heard this called a no-footed coaster wheelie, so pick a side and be sure to start a huge flame war in the comments below. Anyway, I can't do these very well, so I passed this trick on to the assistant cycling coach at Leeds McRae College, PJ Noto. From talking with him, you want to get your weight as close to the tipping point as possible and then use your legs to help balance. Thanks for playing bikes with me today, and I'll see you guys next time.